Patriots? Just like their history or what? I'm just curious.
I'll never cheer for the Patriots.
In college.
Huh?
I don't think I'll ever cheer for the Patriots.
Well, I think it's cool though that their quarterback is so young. I will say that. I think that's kind of inspiring. But yeah, I really don't care. I'll be more interested in watching the commercials or hearing about the different comments made about the commercials. But yeah.
I had a question. So I know that there's for Super Bowl commercials, you know, they're all like the hype for 'em. What's the reasoning for companies releasing their Super Bowl commercial ahead of time? I think a couple of companies have been like, well, what
I
does
think
that help or hurt them? It's like from like a marketing standpoint.
I think I think it can only improve your reach, right? It's kind of like bringing Black Friday sales earlier and earlier, or like the pumpkin spice latte with Starbucks just comes earlier and earlier, right? So I think if people are already in that mental state of, oh, these are forthcoming, they might be more prone to click on it and see. And there's a couple of reasons I think it's a great question from a kind of a consumer psychology standpoint. For some people, I think there are some people that will be like to feel like they're the innovators. They're, kind of on the trendy side of things, in the know, like they're market mavens. And so they can say, oh, I saw this commercial. What'd you think of it? Or you've got to see this, or, like they like to stay ahead of, I hate to say stay ahead of everybody else, but do you know the type I'm referring to? Okay, so you kind of know people like that. And so I think it can attract a certain segment to click on those commercials and ultimately expand their reach and get whatever their marketing message is out, earlier than later. If there's no reason to wait. Now it does, on the other hand, kind of hurt that element of surprise. But yeah, that's a great question. But I honestly don't pay too much attention to the commercials during the game because my kids, my friends, all the things, right? You're distracted. And so I usually watch them the next day after I read like the articles that were written on, what commercial was the best or what were good, what were bad. How many of you guys just watched the game? How many of you plan to watch the game or watch the commercials? Yeah. So anyhow, I always like it. It's fun. Did you have a question?
Well, I was gonna say related to this year, do you think that there also at some point, because they're going to use the Super Bowl as a lead-in to the Olympic coverage?
Mm-hmm. Oh, which I'm so excited about, by the way.
That-
I really am. Like, I haven't watched Winter Olympics in a long time.
That there might be more of a excitement or like incentive to get marketers to put something in front of people because there's gonna be the double eyes.
Oh,
possibly.
definitely, yeah. You've got, usually people who are watching the Super Bowl are, a good chunk are sports enthusiasts,
Mhm.
right? And so you think about those same folks are gonna be watching or likely interested in the Winter Olympics.
Because
Yeah.
they're less sports fans so much as like event kind of fans.
Yeah, so, but I do think it's gonna tap a similar, if you're marketing, watching the Olympics, you're gonna tap a very similar customer segment, than those watching the Super Bowl. But I don't know why I'm so excited about the Winter Olympics this year. Maybe it's because my boys can they finally understand, like, sports are tough. You can't just get up and start skating and do a triple axel. Like, you actually have to practice that, and so I think maybe it's because it's their first year where they kind of fully understand and appreciate the athleticism and the competitiveness of it. So I'm looking forward to that. Speaking of which, is Lindsey Vonn okay? Anyone know? She crashed on her last practice. I don't even know what it's called when you go downhill skiing, but yeah, so stay tuned on that. So she is roughly my age, so I don't know how. I can't. Obviously, I'm not a skater, or a skier. So I don't know what's going to happen there, but should be fun to watch. So I have a few announcements. Oh yes.
I was also gonna ask, Now with Southwest, with them changing kind of everything with their seating,
Oh, yeah.
how do you think that's gonna affect?
Well, I think from the standpoint, that's a great question. So she asked, in case the online folks can't hear, with Southwest now requiring seat assignments, right? Essentially is what they do. How is that going to affect them? I will say the question I would have is how much has their price changed? Because if we're looking at who is the core customer for Southwest?
Is it more?
Price conscious.
Yeah, more affordable, price conscious, like, it's not quite Sun Country or what's the other one, Spirit, right? That's a little bit even cheaper than Southwest, but I would say if the price point hasn't changed much, at the end of the day, they're very similar to like the industry standard. And so I think that they're probably, my guess, not being an expert in the airline industry, my guess is it's probably not going to hurt them that much. If anything, you would think it's gonna benefit them. They should have done the ROI calculations on that. So, speaking of ROI calculations, we need to talk about that today. I will say, one of the things though that drives me nuts about boarding airplanes here in the US is that we all tend to board from the same door, right? Like when you go on an airplane, we're all going in the same door. Have you ever been on a plane where there's two boarding entries, one in the back? Well, yeah. Isn't it way more efficient? It is way more efficient. Like if you, like I have, when I was in Europe, I forget what airlines we were using, but they had some of us board from the back, some of us board from the front. So much faster. There's got to be a reason why we don't do that in the US. I don't know, but I think it's something to look into. Okay, so let's talk about a few things before we get into content today. So for one, we have, who is the Farrell's GA? Isn't someone in here? Okay, you want to talk about it or do you want me to talk about it?
Then you can talk about
You want me to talk? Okay, add in anything I forget, okay? So don't forget this week, and this is for the online folks too, there's supposed to be a Zoom link. Do you know how the Zoom link will be shared?
I'll first coordinate with Professor Farrell first.
Okay, so they have to reach out to Professor Farrell?
Yeah, no, I would work on that.
Oh, he's working on it. Okay. So, long story short, if you go back to, where is this? Andy Crocker. Okay, so the announcement on January 15th that related to February 5th. This week, the Center for Ethical Organizational Cultures is hosting this individual here who had a lot of experience in leadership and strategy. And so it's at 4:00 on February 5th. There's a Zoom link, or there's supposed to be a Zoom link, particularly for those in the online section who can't come in person. I believe they're going to be giving away books as well for students that attend because he wrote a book. And I don't know the name of his book. I don't know anything other than I know that OC was going to order them and hand them out to students. So I highly recommend you to sign up. I believe you have to register here. And so then they know that, expect your attendance, and they knew, I guess, how many seats to have, et cetera, et cetera. So please sign up and check that out. And I will give extra credit, likely equivalent to one exam question. So he's on it. You'll probably get me the attendance or participation. And so I encourage you to please look into that and see if your schedule allows for that. Speaking of announcements, I also want to say I had a change of plans for Exam 1. So this is my first time using Respondus Lockdown Browser. I've always used ProctorU with the online folks, but after some changes and some issues with ProctorU, I decided, I'm going to try something new with Respondus. So as you saw in my announcement, because I'm still waiting on Big Tech, I just realized they never replied. But my gut instinct is that if you have digital notes or lecture slides saved on your computer, you can't use the same device when taking your exam. So if you only have one device, I would print off, hopefully you have a hard copy of the textbook or some other way to get the textbook, but I would print off your notes, print off your PowerPoint slides. Any resources online, I would have tangible copies of them because I think you can't have other windows open with Respondus Lockdown Browser. So for exam 1, I'm not having Respondus Lockdown Browser required just because I just want to make sure that you guys have the digital resources because I, said you could use Open Book, Open Note. I want to make sure you can still use those resources. But for exam 1, you don't need Respondus Lockdown Browser. But for the remaining, I call them quizzes. For those remaining ones, we will have Respondus Lockdown Browser, but keep that in mind that you can't likely open other windows on your computer when you're taking the exam. With that, any questions about Respondus Lockdown Browser? No. Okay, so that should be that there. Feedback on Gordon Wade. I posted this announcement here. After class, Gordon and I got talking a lot about things, and he said he would love to have feedback from the students on, what if they thought it was valuable, what they liked, what they would recommend changing. And so I put together a quick little survey for you guys to give some feedback to him. And please be honest. Now, I will read through the feedback and share with him a more synthesized report. But, I encourage you to look this over and take a minute or two to complete this survey. So with that said, in talking about Gordon Wade, I hope you saw in his presentation some of the things we talked about in class. One of the things he first started off talking about how is with Nestle Purina, he talked about how it seemed like there were very distinct companies operating within the overall company. And so that was the point I wanted to get across when we were talking about strategic business units in chapter 2, is that, often when we talk about strategy, oftentimes at your large firms, you tend to have, different units that seem to be operating, kind of on their own, with their own resources, own budget, own management, or, a distinct management line, and very distinct competitors. And so I, here had the example with General Mills. And I think you could kind of see through that in his presentation as well. He also talked a little bit about the functional strategy with marketing. In that overall, at the end of the day, with strategic planning, the goal is to develop a strategy where you are developing a marketing program, your 4 Ps, to a specific target market. And so he talked about, the very different products. I don't know if I should say very different, but different products in terms of cat food that were aimed at reaching a different segment. And I think it's really interesting. I don't have cats because my oldest son is incredibly allergic, but I'm interested. I was talking to Gordon afterwards, and he goes, what was the cat food that reduced like the allergy issue? Was it like something pro? Mm-hmm. Something like that. He's like, you should get your friend's mom a bag of that for a gift or something. I'm like, I would, but I just feel like, I feel like that's not appropriate. But anyhow, because my son's best friend, in his house there are 5 cats. And so we've come to this point where it's like, we only go over there in the summer when they'll put the slip and slide or something outside. Because if we go inside, I need to either give him Benadryl or Allegra and just be prepared before and after because it's not good. But anyhow, I was like, no, can't do that. But very interesting. I feel like in listening to him talk about all the different segments of cat food buyers. You know, to me, cat food's cat food. But again, I'm not in the market for cat food, but I can see the point, you know, where he was talking about how cat food buyers have very distinct needs sometimes. So I thought that was a good illustration of, you know, what marketers are doing when it comes to strategic planning. I also thought it was interesting that he said 18 months in terms of, I think that's what he said. Was it 18 months for when he talked about developing a strategy to execution? And so these plans are made, you know, in advance. And so typically the marketing plan is like a year long that continually gets revised. And so for him, for his company, it was a little longer. But other than that, you know, I enjoyed it, thought it was very interesting, but please provide that feedback. One other thing I wanted to mention about this is I gave, you know, in that Panopto reporting, I gave an overview of when marketers are looking at attractiveness of a market, a potential market, you're looking at both the attractiveness and their competitive position. So how attractive is that market? Looking at these types of issues, and how can we compete in that market? Looking at these issues here, okay? So kind of looking at obviously growth rate and how lucrative that market would be, and can the company reach that consumer segment? And when he was talking about, was it cat litter that was lighter in weight? Remember that? You know, I think that was a good illustration of this point too. And that he was talking about how that is a huge pain point for a sizable segment of the market. And they found that their company had the ability to do that and could have a strong competitive position in the market. And so to me, those two factors, you know, could be really illustrated in that example. And I will say, we had a very similar thought. You know, what did you ask about if you would delete a product, if you'd ever delete a product? I think it was you when you asked if the product.
Oh, if he would just cannibalize his core.
Yes, because that is a huge issue, and that's where I was going at with my question too to him, is that cannibalization happens a lot with new product development. In other words, what I mean by that is instead of getting new customers, you're switching your current customers over from one product to another. So at the end of the day, your ROI isn't that great. For example, how many of you are familiar with the company like Loft and Ann Taylor? You know a little bit about them? Okay. Well, let me see if I can. Their product lines are a little different now. Okay, both make women's clothes. Okay, so I guess here are some examples of clothes at the Loft. Here are some examples of clothes at Ann Taylor. For a while, this company was really struggling. So they're owned by the same company. Because what was happening is they were launching Loft stores and Ann Taylor stores like at the same location, so at the same mall or something of the sort. And so what was happening is that Ann Taylor tends to be, I would say, a little higher price point. Nowadays, like now it's a little higher price point. Now it's a little, I would say, higher quality. Loft, more affordable, right? Not as high priced. Would you all agree with me on that? Anything else you might want to add? Okay. So anyhow, but for the longest time, they were offering relatively similar products at a relatively similar price point, and then their stores were in the same location. Like sometimes like across the hall from each other in a mall. Okay? What do you think happened? Your customers from Ann Taylor would oftentimes shift down to Loft. So they weren't necessarily tapping the same, or they weren't tapping a new market. They were essentially losing money because their Loft offerings were basically not distinctive enough. I should say that Ann Taylor offerings essentially were not as, they weren't any different than Loft. They weren't perceived as any different than the Loft items. And so customers naturally will flock to the cheaper option, which was Loft. So now the two companies, well, after closing certain stores, now you can see that Ann Taylor tends to operate at a higher price point. So here we see all above, well, with the exception of those pants, all above $100, where if you go to Loft, a much lower price point. So now you have different products, different price points, different quality perceptions in different locations because of the cannibalization that company experienced. Probably around 2015, 2014 is when I was probably, if I had to guess a year. So now you all are reading through the first case that's due at a minimum. Some of you are working on or submitting your case analysis soon. I do want to talk about some marketing math before we get into discussing chapter 3, because on the Reliance Baking Soda case, which I believe just opened up today, is that correct? For the group that's assigned the RBS case, it should have opened up. You should be able to see that now. But in that case, there is some marketing math that you all will be expected to do. And again, even if you're not assigned this case, you should know how to do the math because it's highly likely that it will show up on an exam. Okay, different numbers, but the same types of information will be provided. So the RBS case talks about Reliance Baking Soda, and they're looking at the performance of the different promotions that the company has engaged in, both on the consumer side and on the business side. So in other words, promotions that are aimed at us as end users or buyers of baking soda, but also the company is looking at the performance of promotions targeted towards retailers or grocers. Okay. So here's a refresher of some marketing math. We talked about this earlier in the semester. And I want to say, in the case provides you your net marketing contribution amount for each promotion. Or you might have to do some calculations for it as well. But they refer to it, I think, as net incremental contribution. Yeah, net incremental contribution. So it's labeled a little bit differently, but it means the same thing as a net marketing contribution. So keep that in mind. They will also give you the costs of the promotion. So, which would be, in this case, your marketing and sales expense. In the case, you are asked to compute the ROI, which again is your net marketing contribution divided by your sales, marketing or sales expense, times 100%. Sometimes you do a return on sales calculation as well. I did not ask for it in the case this time, but an ROS for that is simply your marketing contribution divided by your sales times 100%. So let's walk through this typical income statement. This is a very basic income statement, yes.
So I have a question. Our group has Sunday do Sunday. And it's
Okay.
listed as Lululemon, but on your marketing plan project, it has this as the Reliance Baking Soda case. So we've already started the Lululemon.
Okay, let's talk after class.
Okay. Yeah.
Because there should, if whatever's on the Excel spreadsheet, what do you mean? The Excel spreadsheet's what you're assigned.
Okay.
So where did it say Lululemon?
On assignments. Yeah.
Oh yeah, on assignments due, everybody's gonna have all the cases listed. You're gonna have to show on every case, and that's there so that everyone reads it. It's like a reminder, like, hey, yeah. So you're not, the Excel spreadsheet, thank you for asking that question, is the one that is correct. Like on Canvas, let me see. I realize that can be confusing, but why that's there is simply to be like, hey, don't forget to read this. So if you're in here, okay, camera folks, can you like point? Sorry, I have no control over. Okay, maybe I need to go over this way. Okay, if I stick here, I don't know if the online folks can see this, but if you go on Canvas and you're on the course page, when you have the coming up on the right-hand side of the screen, you're always gonna see every single upcoming case on the right-hand side saying it's due. And that's simply because I want to remind you all, hey, at a minimum, you gotta read that case and you should be thinking about these questions. Now, the cases though that you are assigned are in the Files tab. When you go to MBA group assignments, the file that looks like this shows wherever your name is, you need to look up and say, oh, that's the case I'm assigned. Oh, that's the project I'm assigned. Okay, so be sure you're looking at the Excel file because that will indicate the case and the project. And again, for your marketing, if you're assigned a marketing plan project, you can do that for a company of your choice. You don't have to complete a marketing plan for the company that's associated with your case. In other words, if you're Madison Pierce and you're on Madison's team, you don't have to create a marketing plan for J. Crew. You can create a marketing plan for any company or organization of your choice. Oftentimes I see students do it for, one of their employers or one of their favorite brands. But again, you would create a marketing plan, but your team will be graded on the J. Crew case. Okay, does that make sense? Yes, okay. Good question, I'm glad you brought that up. Okay. So when we talk about marketing math, so just a refresher here. So you have your sales revenue. And so the money that you've generated, the sales that you've generated, then you less your cost of goods sold. What's your cost of goods sold? How are my accountants?
Most of the inventory that you sold.
Okay, so the cost of the inventory that you've sold. So it could be the variable costs or the costs that change based on production volume changes. It could include manufacturing overhead. It all really just depends on the accounting principles that are being followed. In this class, you're not going to compute cost of goods sold. It would be given. Okay, so you have your sales revenues minus your cost of goods sold. That gives you gross profit. Then marketers will often look at what were our marketing and sales expenses. Okay, so here we're going to be looking at what were our sales expenses, what were our promotion expenses, what were our customer support expenses. Any sort of marketing and sales expense is on this line item here. Yep.
Does that include wages for marketers?
It might include marketing salaries. Some might. Oftentimes those will get put in this column too. So in this case, great question. So in this case, you have your gross profit then, less your marketing and sales expense, which gives you a marketing contribution of 25, okay? In this case, 25 million. So what you can say here is that we implemented a strategy that cost us $20 million. Okay, our marketing strategy cost us $20 million. We brought in $130 million. That left us $25 million to cover remaining expenses. So what your net marketing contribution is doing, and here your marketing ROI that you'll be calculating, is you take your net marketing contribution divided by your sales expense. So in this case, 25 divided by 20 times 100. And you can say that for every dollar invested in this marketing strategy or in our marketing costs, we brought in $1.25. Okay? And ratio metrics, like your marketing ROI, are so important because they allow comparisons to be made. So in this RBS case, we're comparing different promotions that occurred throughout the year. So you're able to, by creating this ratio metric, determine relatively what promotion performed better than others. What was bringing in more money than others? What promotion should we kind of terminate? What promotion should we continue to run? So ROI metrics like these can be used for promotions. They can be used for different product lines. You can compare your numbers to other products or other divisions within a company. You can compare them to competitors. However, sometimes it's very difficult to get competitor information. And I think Gordon talked about that as well. And also, these sorts of analyses can be used when looking at different customer segments. How effective will our strategy be on this particular consumer segment compared to this consumer segment? And so we can be looking at ROIs and helping us determine, okay, this is a better segment for us. This is going to be more profitable, more attractive. We're rolling with that. Okay, going back to the slide I had up earlier. Okay. So these sort of ratio metrics can be used for a variety of different analyses, but ultimately they're used to help inform the marketer or the decision maker, not only of how successful their strategy was, but what they should do moving forward. So after your net marketing contribution, you have your general admin and other operating expenses. So these could be things like, all the other expenses that allow the company to exist, right? So you could have salaries there, you could have professional fees, you could have taxes and interest, research development expenses, all sorts of things fall under that category. Then that leaves you operating income or the profit realized from the business's operations. Okay. This is a very, very, very basic, generalized income statement. I'm sure most of you in finance realize that, okay? And so, or accounting, I should say. But at the end of the day, what I'm going to be caring about is your understanding of what that net marketing contribution represents and how to do the ROI calculation. Okay. Now, I believe for the case you can't do these sort of calculations for all the years. I believe it's only the 2006 year because there was some missing information for other years. So you can keep that in mind as well. Any questions about that? It'll make more sense once you get into it. And I will tell you that those cases do a good job of providing almost too much information, which is used to distract you and make you look at irrelevant information. Okay, so be careful about what numbers you see and look closely, as you read through that case. Okay, so let's get into talking about chapter 3. So we've talked about what marketing strategy is all about. Okay. What is its focus? And developing a strategy begins with having information. And this chapter is all about looking at the types of information that marketers might be looking at. And so hence the title, Collecting and Analyzing marketing information. So we're gonna be talking about a situation analysis, which examines the internal, customer, and external environments. We're gonna talk about questions that marketers should be considering as they go about examining the external environment and the customer environment and their own internal environment. Because again, when we're talking about strategic marketing planning, we're looking at where is the company today and where does it want to be? What's its plan for the future? Because usually in business, you can't just stay the same. There's external changes that will require a firm to change. And then lastly, if we have time, I want to spend some time talking about research techniques used to understand customer behavior. Now, this is not in your textbook, but Gordon brought up ethnography studies do you remember he was talking about going into people's homes and watching them feed their cats, right? A lot of primary research happens in marketing. I know some students working in the industry or some Auburn alums that work in the industry. And I want to talk about some of these techniques that marketers use to better understand their customers. And Gordon specifically talked about pain points, which are important, right? But just observing the behavior, understanding what they're doing, what are they thinking, which can be very insightful for new product development. So to begin, when we're crafting a marketing strategy, we're gathering data, right? We're gathering information from a variety of different sources. Usually it begins with the internal environment, looking at the internal company records, and then moving on to the external environment as well. Oops, there we go. And oftentimes, when we're looking at information, the majority of companies today are operating and making decisions off big data, right? Most of our large firms are. When we think about these large data sets that marketers have access to, how is that data being generated? How are you generating data for firms? Where are they getting their information from?
Surveys, small groups, financial reports.
Okay, so customer surveys, financial reports, those internal things he talked about. What else?
Also, whenever you sign up for rewards.
Program, so your loyalty, so all the data you provide when you sign up for a loyalty program. Also rebates, right? Do you guys know what a rebate is? Where you fill out a form, and usually there's a lot of information that they ask for when you're filling out that rebate form. Yep.
Sales issue from retailers.
Okay, so sales issues from retailers. Yes, transaction data. So you think about your purchases, right? They're recording your purchase data, linking it to your loyalty account or the information they have on you based on other information they obtain. They're looking at your click-through rates, right? Like what are you clicking on? How long you're staying on a page? What else? They can look at your social media activity. Even your GPS can be tracked. So big data, you look at pretty much, it's like your phone tells everybody everything about you, I feel like. But it's just, because of technological advances, there's so much information out there that part of the problem for marketers really is in looking at all of this, what's important. And so it's almost like information overload to some extent when it comes to marketing. And so the question I always encourage students to look at or consider is the information going to change your marketing plan? Is it insightful that it's going to lead to a change in your program? If not, it's probably not relevant, okay? So it can feel overwhelming at times. Now, so we know there's a lot of information about customers out there. a lot of information about you out there, based on your own consumption habits. And there are ethical issues that companies need to consider. You know, we've talked about privacy issues and how firms should almost have a contingency plan in place when it comes to information being shared, or customer information being shared with some bad actors. But I mean, I think back to, did you guys ever read the New York Times article about the dad whose daughter was pregnant and Target kept emailing? Did you guys? Yes? Okay, so there's an article, a well-known article that was published in the New York Times. You can probably Google it and find it. And it was, I think it really kind of opened up people's eyes to how much information firms have on customers. And so the article talked about how this dad was upset with Target because Target was sending his daughter basically Target was sending mail to his daughter about like pregnancy and baby stuff. And the dad's like, my daughter's not pregnant. Well, Target knew before the dad knew, like the girl's dad, not her baby's dad. But anyhow, so the daughter did not tell her father that she was expecting a child. And so Target could tell based on her consumption habits. And there's a lot of research out there that, looks at, okay, people who are clicking or watching and observing or purchasing this are also good candidates, usually for this item. Oddly, beer and diapers for the longest time were correlated so that people who were buying diapers often would buy beer, okay, in grocery stores. So a lot of products get correlated, and that's something certainly that marketers look at because then you can grow your transaction size, right? Talk about building a sale, right? So lots of very interesting data out there on customers, but there are some ethical issues that we need to consider. I'll give you another example too, is a while back there was a rental car company, I want to say it was in Maryland. And through the GPS tracking on the rental vehicle, they could tell that this driver went well above the speed limit when this individual was using the rental vehicle. They ended up fining the customer a certain amount and saying that, they broke the policy of the rental contract, this, that, and the next thing. And obviously the customer wasn't expecting that fine, and I believe the customer ended up suing the rental car firm. But really interesting. I wouldn't really think about that in a rental car, but that technology is there. So ultimately, there's lots of data to sift from, and marketers need to ask themselves, what's important and what's going to affect our 4 Ps. So when we look at gathering data in marketing planning, we're looking at the internal information, customer information, and the external environment, or what I like to think of as our 5 forces. Because ultimately, I should say, the goal is that you're improving your marketing planning. You're making better decisions using the information that you have. And it's better decisions because you're using relevant information. Now, I do want to say one thing before I move on to the next slide, is oftentimes students, they look at differences and they don't really understand the difference between a mathematical difference, a statistical difference, and a managerial difference. So let's say, for example, that women, on average, and this is purely fictitious, I completely am making this up. Women on average spend $5.25 on bottled water a month. Men, on the other hand, do they spend more or less?
More.
Okay, some are saying more, some are saying less. I'll say more just because I heard more first. Okay. Let's say they spend on average 10 cents more. Is that a mathematical difference? Absolutely, right? Like there's a 10 cents difference. It's not the same number. Is it a statistical difference? Do you guys have to take a stats class as part of your program? Yeah. So if you achieve a large enough sample size, so let's say you go out and you do research and you ask men and women how much they spend on bottled water. At some point, this would likely become a statistical difference where do you talk about p-values less than 0.05 or p-values less than 0.01 or talk about p-values in that stats class, right? So at some point with a given sample size, that might become a statistically significant difference, okay? At the end of the day, though, the question should be for the marketer, is it a managerially relevant difference, okay? Does it matter? So if I'm going to develop a strategy, in this case, let's say that my strategy might be, my goal of my marketing plan might be to get women to buy more, okay? I want to increase the monthly consumption or monthly spend on water to be higher. If that's my overarching goal and I'm going to develop this marketing plan, is it justified? The question is, maybe, okay, or the answer is maybe, because at some point, you're going to be looking at what's going to be the cost of implementing this new marketing program, and also what's the ROI on it, okay? Is the sales volume going to go up really that much that our ROI or our net marketing contribution is more than the cost of the strategy? Okay, and then if this goes up again, is it really going to be truly different than male spending? It's questionable, okay? So there is a difference. Mathematical, how do you spell mathematical? Yeah, I thought there was mathematical, statistical. And your stats professor probably hates me saying this, but that's how it is in the real world. At some point, you can get a very small mathematical difference to be statistically significant, but it's not necessarily managerially significant, okay? So keep that in mind when you're thinking about developing a marketing strategy, or now even you might think of me when you take your stats class. Okay, so moving on. So when we talk about information gathering, I bring this up because this is an illustration that was in a marketing research textbook, because the same principle applies when it comes to information gathering pertaining to market planning. So the iceberg principle as it relates to marketing research says that 10% of your problem is observable, okay? In this case, think of it being above water, what you can see. Whereas the majority of your problem lies beneath, okay? You can't really see it, and it's your job as the marketer to go out and figure out what's your problem. So it's kind of like when you go to the doctor. Most of the time you don't go into the doctor and say, oh, hey, I have XYZ. Instead, you go in the doctor and you say, okay, I've noticed this, this, and this, and then your doctor makes a determination on, whatever illness you may have. The same applies to marketing. The marketers see that, okay, sales are down or our market share's down. That's a symptom. That's not a problem. Well, in layman's terms, yes, it's kind of a problem. Not good. right? But that's not the cause. That's not the root of the problem. What needs to be discovered is why. Why are your sales down? Why is your market share down? So here, up here, it says you might see unhappy customers. So maybe your satisfaction rankings are going lower. Maybe you're getting bad survey data or bad customer feedback, low traffic, loss of sales, decreased market share. So obviously those are all observable in a marketing context. You got to look to try to figure out the cause. Okay, a marketer needs to figure out, what is it? Are these happening because of poor branding? I really liked Gordon talking about staying on brand when he talked about not going into certain areas with his brands. So is it because of branding? Is it because you have low quality products, defective products that aren't, doing what they're supposed to do? Is it because your delivery system is inadequate? Is it because your salespeople aren't treating customers right? Do your sales lack certain sales training? Or are they just not motivated? Right? You've got to, as a researcher and as a marketer, especially when it comes to planning, make sure down here, these are the real problems, okay? And you need to figure out that you have correctly defined the problem, because if you have incorrectly defined your problem, you may be creating a marketing plan that really is not going to do what you intend for it to do, because you've crafted a plan aimed to address something other than the root of the problem. Okay? Yes.
Would you say stuff that you would see on the balance sheet would be the top stuff? Like if you were seeing your profits are dropping or your revenues dropping, would you say that that's kind of above the iceberg?
I
You
would.
would see?
I would ask why. I would ask, why are they dropping? What's that cause? And we got to change that. So, and usually it comes down to your competitors. Oftentimes faulty products or issues with the customer experience in your brand. Or it could be, usually it's usually one of those two, but it could be other issues too. But most of the time, that's where you see the true problems really lying, and it's the marketer's job to figure that out. Because that's what needs to be changed, and your strategy should be crafted to address the real problem, not the symptoms. Okay. So ask yourself, if you're in a marketing role, I would ask yourself a lot of why questions. Why is this happening? What is the root cause? Because that's what needs to be fixed. And a lot of times, firms will hire external firms to do research for them. And so they'll work with either McKinsey or Nielsen or some of the other marketing research firms. And sometimes firms will tell you, hey, our problem is this. We want you to investigate this issue. And as a marketer or marketing researcher, step number one is making sure that that problem was correctly defined. Sometimes that can be a really hard conversation with a firm. Say, I know you wanted us to address this, but we really think the problem is this, based on what we see. That can be a fun conversation. Okay, so when we're talking about the external environment, we're going to be considering issues within the internal environment, the customer environment, and the external environment. And there's some great illustrations in your book, so I've put them in the PowerPoint slides here. And I want to point out that these are interdependent. While we talk about these environments as being distinct, they're really not. They're interrelated because something in the external environment can affect your customers, which in turn is going to affect your marketing program. I'll give you an example. This November, it was November. What happened? What did the FFA do? Or FAA? What did they do? You guys remember what they did? Anybody flying in November?
Restricted the number of flights.
Yes, so they reduced the number of flights, I think at certain airports by 10%. Okay, do you guys remember that? I was presenting at a conference in Las Vegas when that happened. And so here we go, right? And so they reduced them because it was related to the government shutdown, right? Like they had issues with aircraft traffic controllers, lots and lots of things. And so I can't remember all the reasons why they reduced the flights to what they did. But long story short, government made that change. Okay, so there we're talking about here, okay, right, your external environment. And so now, what do you do if you're an airline? And now suddenly you're having to cancel flights, reroute customers. What do? You got to change your offering, right? You got to change your program. So I was happy to be flying Delta. And, you know, normally if you change your flight, you are charged for it, right? There's a change fee. Well, so I'm sitting at lunch at this conference and I get the alert about this change, and Delta gave customers the option because it was going into effect on, I believe, a Friday. And so they allowed you to book an earlier flight on Thursday at no charge if you wanted to kind of escape any potential chaos or additional chaos, I should say, at an airport. And so I thought that was right. Like, to me, that shows to me that Delta cares, right? They're trying to alleviate the stress that their customers might experience. And I was sitting there at that lunch table thinking, okay, if I'm going to, now I could have taken a red eye, but I was like, yeah, no, I'm not taking a red eye out of Las Vegas to Atlanta, then driving from Atlanta here, and then go on no sleep, because I don't sleep well on airplanes, like pretty much go on no sleep and then have a household to manage. That's just not going to happen. So if I were to change my flight, I had about 10 minutes to run up to my hotel room, pack everything, and get in an Uber and go to the airport to catch, you know, the flight that was at a reasonable time. And I thought, you know what? I'm not doing that. It just sounds stressful. I'm just going to roll the dice and fly out as I was supposed to. And I will say, I thought the reps, like, as I'm sitting in the Las Vegas airport and I'm hearing, you know, oh, if your flight is to blah, 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 it's delayed 2 hours, or, oh, your flight has been canceled. Like, all of these horrible announcements. It was not the greatest experience. But I will say I was very pleased with the Delta reps. They were very, very kind. And my flight, I think it only was maybe delayed by an hour. So I was lucky. Yeah, I was lucky. So I was able to make it to Atlanta. But I thought that is a great illustration of how here you've got changes in the external environment that a marketer can't control. And you've got your customers now who have changing wants and needs. Like, some are trying to hurry up and get home or wherever they want to be. And now you have to, in your company, this here it says internal environment, but I also think of it as your marketing program or what you offer customers. They did a good job, I felt like, in handling that experience. I also can think too of the tariffs, right? When the tariffs were launched last, was it February or April? When did they start? I can't remember. One of those months. So when the tariffs launched, right, and people were worried about what was going to happen. Does anybody recall what Ford did?
They did their Ford employee customer pricing.
Yeah, they essentially, I call it a tariff sale, but yeah, so they ran their Ford, what was it, like, employee pricing
They
event.
were going to sell the trucks at the employee pricing.
Yes, so ultimately they started offering their inventory, because I think they had excess inventory too. And so they started offering their vehicles at a reduced price point, and they actually had one of their most successful Aprils ever. I was talking to someone who works at Ford office in marketing, and it was very, very successful for them because they were able to they had the inventory at hand, right? Made in America is a good time, it's good for them right now. And so they had the inventory on hand. They had the ability to change the price. And that's exactly what, customers can be price conscious. And so we ended up buying a new truck. We were planning to get me an SUV, but then my husband's truck started having all sorts of problems. And I'll tell you, trucks are expensive to repair. So he had about an 8 or 9 year old truck, and it just seemed to be one thing after another, one thing after another. And then Ford launched their sale, and it was kind of like, well, why not? I don't think prices are going to get any lower than this. And so we ended up being one of the many of Americans who ended up buying a Ford vehicle during their friends and family special pricing event. But again, Ford adapted or, modified their strategy based on tariffs, and I thought it was great. So when we talk about these environments, there's lots of issues to be considered. And so we'll talk about each of these issues on the next few slides. So when we're thinking about the internal environment, I think this slide had to be changed for accessibility reasons, because otherwise that's a really weird title on the left-hand slide. I apologize for that. But when we're thinking about internal issues as part of our information gathering, we're thinking about a lot of different things. What are the current goals and objectives, and do they need to be changed? Because are they consistent with our corporate or business unit goals and objectives? Are they consistent with changes in the marketplace? Again, those changes we oftentimes can't control. We're looking at current performance of our strategies. We're looking at how our performance compares to other organizations. If it's declining, why? Looking at that why question. If it's improving, also knowing why is important as well. Okay? Is it something that the company is doing, or is it outside in the external environment? Looking at current and anticipated organizational resources. Okay? How are our resources? I think I've got something on the next slide. Nope, okay. There's a lot of different resources, and we're going to talk about it at a later chapter, but looking at, not just financial resources. It's looking at human resources, the jobs we have, the people we have, the culture we have, the relationships we have with key suppliers. How are those resources going to, first off, will they change? Are they going to stay the same? What's going to help us? What's going to help us move forward, or what might hurt us? So those sort of change questions. How can we utilize these resources to meet the needs? If the resources are forecasted for the worst, what can we do to compensate for those constraints? And also looking at cultural issues. Now, I will say that corporate culture or organizational culture is relatively stable, but sometimes it's not. Oftentimes when a merger takes place, culture can change very quickly. Do you guys learn about mergers and acquisitions in some of your other classes? Yes, no, maybe so. Recently you might have seen, was it Amazon and Whole Foods? There were some issues with that merger. In my experience, when Macy's acquired Marshall Fields, there were some serious cultural changes that led to even case studies being written about that merger. So mergers can have significant changes internally for a company, and it can be kind of challenging to work in that environment, depending on what's happening with that particular merger. So, what are some positive, negative aspects of the current and forecasted or anticipated culture? What's going on with internal politics? How's that going to affect marketing activities? And overall position and importance of the marketing function. Not all CEOs and not all leadership sees marketing the same way. I'll tell you that. And it can be sometimes challenging to work with leaders who don't really understand the importance of marketing. Okay, they don't see the value. And so leadership can have a huge influence on the marketing team and also in turn potentially the performance of a marketing strategy. Because your strategy needs to be funded by resources. And it's very important to get the leadership team or the leaders or whoever's making the decisions to allocate financial resources to get them on board. And I think you kind of indirectly heard Gordon talk about that to some extent when he talked about, selling your ideas when it comes to market planning. So, and when we look to understand our internal environment, we just talked about a bunch of questions and issues that get addressed there. Now let's talk about the customer environment. Understanding your current and potential customers and their associated needs and potential changes in needs is at the heart of understanding your customers. It's that why, okay? And just like how Gordon talked about going into people's homes and watching them feed their cats, that's your current customers. But what he didn't really talk about is potential customers. Customers' needs change. I no longer need to buy diapers. It's a wonderful thing, right? So my Target runs, do you think they've gone up or gone down? Down. But what Target might want to do is, and I think they do actually a very good job of this. They still send me emails and all the things, but you've got to realize your customer changes, right? You go from needing diapers to needing toys and bedding, now Nintendo Switches and those types of things, right? So the needs don't stay the same. The needs change. And so as a marketer, you got to understand that and realize, that customers' priorities are changing. We have to change with them. So as a marketer, you're looking at how products and competing products fulfill those needs. And again, changes, okay? Needs constantly are changing. And when we talk about understanding our customers, your book talks about a 5W model that is aimed to understand relevant customer behavior and characteristics. And so questions to be asking yourself here are things like, who is my customer? And by that, we're talking about those demographic or psychographic or lifestyle type issues of our different customer segments. Again, you can probably think of those different cat food segments. And certainly those that are buying the lightweight litter who are paying a premium probably have a little bit different makeup than some of those other segments. Okay? So, and also geographic issues too, where they live. That's looking at, again, looking at who our customers are. What? The what question asks things like, what are they buying? Okay, what are they doing with our products? A lot, and so here we could look at how they're, what they're buying in terms of cat food, how are they using the container? And also, sometimes customers are using products in ways that marketers don't intend them to be used. For example, baking soda. How many of you use baking soda? And how do you use it? Do you cook with it? Do you clean with it? I think you can do something with bee stings.
Yeah.
And it you make some sort of paste, or maybe that's baking powder. I don't know.
Poison ivy too.
Oh, poison ivy too. Okay. This weekend I learned I was making a soup because it was so cold. And I somehow managed to burn food. I was making like a cream of chicken wild rice, and I somehow managed to like burn parts of the food or the milk on the bottom of the pan. And it got stuck on there. It was so,
Baking
good.
soda and then like Coca-Cola.
Well, so I didn't know. I was like, what do I do? I'm like, shoot, my husband's gonna kill me that I burnt. It's not, I'm trying to remember the name of the pans that his mom gifted him with this like French
What did you
brand.
say?
Nope, it's not that. It's like something with an S.
Oh, stop.
Yeah, that's it. How do you spell it?
STAUB.
Yeah, okay, so these pans, and I have a feeling they're kind of expensive. Are they expensive?
Yeah,
Yeah, okay. Well, so I made the soup in this expensive pan, and of course, the bottom's just black. It is like fried on there, and I was like, oh, this is not good. This is not good. It's only lasted a month. But anyhow, so I'm scrubbing, I'm, Googling how do I clean this, because this particular pan has only certain care instructions. You can't just use certain soap, throw it in the dishwasher, whatever. But I ended up putting the pan back on the burner, and you put a couple tablespoons of baking soda, a little vinegar and water, you heat it, and then you like scrub with the warm or boiling water and it'll come off. Now it didn't damage the pan, thank goodness. But baking soda can be used in that way. So if you are cooking and you burn food on your pan and you have black marks all on it, know that just go get yourself some baking soda. But baking soda, was originally to be used in baking, but now they've developed like toothpaste, cleaning products, so many different things, because customers have used this product in very different ways than marketers originally intended for it to be used. You didn't even talk about it being used as a deodorizer. Some people put it in their fridge to deodorize. So with that said, the what are they doing with our products can be very interesting to observe. That also can impact issues related to derived demand. So derived demand means like when the demand for a certain product depends on the sales of another product. So for instance, when you buy your phone, you're only buying your phone. No, what else are you buying?
Service.
What?
Service.
Okay, service, chargers,
Cases.
cases, maybe insurance or that protective screen, right? So those all relate to derived demand, right? They're complementary products that you might buy when a customer buys a phone. Where looks at questions of where they are purchasing products. Yes, certainly there is growth in online sales. Love, the convenience, all of that. But still a lot of sales still occur in stores. Now, as we talk about big data, some companies are using the data that they have on customers and looking at zip codes. Where are we shipping a lot of our products? And that can be insightful in figuring out, would it be beneficial for us to place a store in that zip code? Because are you more likely to spend more online or in a store?
Online.
Some of you are saying online. Oftentimes it's in store, right? Because a lot of impulse buys happen in the store. So looking at that shipping information and looking at where your customers are living, particularly if you're an online retailer, that might be informative for deciding store locations if you also have a brick and mortar store. With that said, I realize it's 12:15. We need to end there for today. Have a great rest of your Monday. And I will see you on Wednesday.
Already did. Oh, you mean for Reliance, yeah.